I'm Jamila Owens-Todd, naturopathic doctor, and today I will be teaching the chemistry of terpenes. The purpose of this course is for you to just have a deeper understanding of what is a terpene. Also, I want you to understand some of the therapeutic benefits of these terpenes, in addition to being able to making quality product selections so that you can maximize your healing when using cannabis. So when we ask the question, what are terpenes? They really do fall into a class of organic compounds called isoprenoids. Isoprenoids, also used interchangeably with the word terpenoid, also used interchangeably with the word terpenes. So we have these different terminology, different words to really address a certain key component of chemicals. Well, what makes them chemically different? The terpene molecule is actually made up of what we call isoprene units. And that's a carbon-based molecule, and we have these combination of carbon units. And we'll see a little bit more detail on what those images are and what they look like. But the isoprene units are combined to form the many different categories of terpenes. So we hear terpenes, but then there are isoterpenes, there are sesquiterpene lactones. I know it's a mouthful, but the key is to understand they really all fall in the same category of isoprenoids. So where does the word terpene actually derive from? It actually comes from turpentine. We've heard about turpentine, which was used as a remedy many moons ago for an antiseptic or for killing infection. People would take the bark of pine trees and boil it and make a resin, because the barks of many trees can form this very waxy resinous material. So the word turpentine actually derived into the category of terpene. Now that word still stems from another word, which is of French origin, called terebinth, which equals or means resin. So resin is the waxy kind of material that we would see associated with different plants. And in order to use these terpenes, we would have to do an extraction and make them into volatile oils, which are aromatic molecules. So again, a mouthful, but the aromatic molecule is most commonly known to us as essential oils. When we think about perfumes or aroma or just the sniff and smells of different plants or flowers or spices, those are essential oils. It is those essential oils that we use and have been using for a very long, extended length of time in our history for medicine and just for overall aromatherapy and healing. So these molecules, which have been documented and their benefits for health and wellness, have been around, and we are now isolating them and finding more of them. There are over 700,000 molecules that fall in the category of isoprenoids. So we have a lot of discovery and a lot to research and a lot to find out, even moving forward, on how these things can be beneficial for us. So in considering the terpene molecules and how they show up in nature, you do find the majority of your terpenes in plants. However, there are some present in the animal form or in the human form. What you want to know is which type of terpene shows up where. So it is important to note that terpenes technically are not considered essential molecules, meaning they're not really there for our viability or the viability of life, which is interesting when we think about what they contribute to life, whether it's plant life or human life. They're very much key in being growth regulators. Plants, you find that terpenes have been used as the most natural pesticide and insecticide known to man. It's been one of the key features of plant survivability, being able to ward off insects or pathogens because of these terpenes. So again, not considered viable, but clearly very functional and essential to their existence. The other thing we consider is the aromatherapy. Now, aromatherapy, as I mentioned earlier, is, just receiving and inhaling the scent. But that scent that a plant is able to release is important in its survivability, it's important in its growth factor, and it's important in attracting really key pollinators, which we know pollination is one of the key factors to plant life and our life. So it is a really key and really cool to see how this plant and its specific chemical, the terpenes, shows great viability. I think the other thing we want to explore is what type of terpene are we looking at? So as I mentioned previously, we have different terpene molecules. Some are shorter and then some are longer. When we get into the very long multi-isoprene units, 30 units or more of the carbon structure, that is where we start to see things like sterols. So the word sterol, which is a plant molecule, also shows up in the human body. You may have been told to watch one of those very key sterols in your life, which would be cholesterol. So the cholesterol molecule is a terpene. Other molecules within the body would be some of our adrenal hormones. So the adrenal gland, two small glands that sit thumb-sized, that sit on top of your kidneys, are very essential in our stress response. So I don't know about you or a lot of you, but if you've ever experienced stress, your body responds to that stress. Unfortunately, sometimes we experience more stress than we would like. In that response, the hormone cortisol is released from your actual adrenal gland in the face of stress. So the more stress you experience, the more cortisol that is produced, and you have more of those hormones that are being engaged and activated in the adrenal gland. Well, those precursor hormones, or the molecule that leads to the production of those hormones, are terpenes. So it really shows the presence, the overwhelming presence of the terpenes in our nature, in our plant life, as well as in human life. So when I start to really think about, well, why are we exploring these terpenes more readily, and why is the information more accessible? It shows that connection between the plant and human existence. Not to go too far off the deep end, but if we remember, plants are living entities, and the gift of them giving us medicine, offering relief, having sometimes a seamless integration into a health and healing phase, it really shows that the synergy, the real entourage, is us working with plants all together and allowing them to come in and be allies or healers in our lives. So as we consider the role of terpenes within the human body, whether it's us taking them in plant form or whether it's our bodies engaging in the natural terpenes that exist within our systems, it is important to note that as we discuss the stress response in the adrenal gland, that really ties into our central nervous system. Central nervous system, that's how our brain, our bodies operate when we think about messages from the brain. There is a very key connection with the adrenal gland and the hypothalamus, as well as the pituitary gland. So we call that the HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. That regular communication in the body is what helps us in hormone production, hormone stabilization, overall just balance in life, stress response, and sleep cycle, appetite, and being able to have just a good mood. So that connection of that HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal gland, it is important to note as we're thinking about the adrenal gland and having actual terpene molecules, think about this. The cannabis plant engages us in many aspects of our neurological system. We have the CB1 receptors and we have the CB2 receptors. Those receptors have presence within our hypothalamus. I always call the hypothalamus the mother. The hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary, and then the pituitary engages with the thyroid, it engages with the adrenal gland, it engages with the reproductive organs. So that communication of the brain with the rest of the body is not only involving terpene molecules, but can also be encouraged and modulated with cannabis plants. As we think about essential oils, and I use the essential oil and the terpene name very interchangeably because the action of those terpenes, when inhaled, it acts just as an essential oil. So we're talking really similar or same molecules. When I think about smelling some flowers, fresh roses, or, sniffing some cinnamon or cardamom, those wonderful spices, that engages our olfactory system. Olfactory means to smell. It's how we inhale and take scents in. You ever think about good aromas like the grandma's cookies, grandma baked cookies, and it brings up really great memories? Well, hopefully they bring up good memories, but if there's a scent that you take in and it flips on the switch for a really positive memory, there is a cell memory that occurs, and that is all engaging the brain. So it's really awesome to think about this interconnected component of how plants can be really key and essential into our health and healing. So that engaging of olfactory, when I smell rose oil or geraniol or lavender essential oil, or if I open up a jar of bubblegum gelato, and I get those initial scents, and they really do flip on a switch to healing, because inhalation of these wonderful fragrances immediately engages the olfactory system. What the olfactory system then does, it stimulates, it sends out a reaction to the brain, and the brain then goes to secrete or release specific neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters, some very popular ones that we may have heard about, are serotonin and dopamine, to be specific. Serotonin, known as kind of the happy hormone or a happy neurotransmitter, helps to lift mood. Where dopamine, unfortunately, we learn about it in the not so good sense of like drug response or addiction. But dopamine does give a feel good, it lifts. So it's an engaging neurotransmitter, and it helps with energy production as well as mood elevation. So knowing that I can take just a whiff of these terpenes, and they have this sequence of events that gets the brain involved and healing kicks in, it tells you just opening a jar of flower, you've already engaged in the healing. Smelling the fresh flowers from your garden, some roses or whatever flower you may have, some dahlias, that can engage your healing. Just knowing that you're preparing a meal and you pull out all of the wonderful spices and you're setting them up ready to dump into your wonderful bowl of, chili or soup, you're engaging a healing response. So it's before I even consume any flower or consume any plant, I've already flipped on the switch to healing. That's what terpenes do. They are precursors to the healing process simply by inhalation. All right, so we got through a lot of terms, a lot of concepts, and a lot of ways how terpenes engage the body. What do I do with this information? That's the question. Like, how do I apply this? How do I talk about it? How do I use it for my own kind of personal healing? I'll start here. We think about terpenes and we know specific ones, but the molecules, again, there are 700,000 plus types of terpene molecules, with one of the most ubiquitous that's found throughout all plants is geraniol. If it sounds familiar, geraniol comes from geranium. If you've ever seen geranium plants, true story, I always kept a geranium plant on my upstairs little deck, and I always heard pigeon doves living in this little flower plot. It was just the cutest thing. Now, of course, I wanted to keep my wonderful geranium plant, but then I'm like, well, the pigeon doves took it over. So they apparently love the fragrance of geraniol. So if you think about where geraniol shows up, geranium, if you ever smelled that essential oil, it's very floral, fragrant, very sweet. Rose flowers would be also another very common flower that contains a lot of the geraniol. So if you get an opportunity to kind of take a whiff of some rose essential oil or geranium essential oil, you'll smell geraniol, which is the very sweet floral terpene, most ubiquitous, found throughout most plants you can find. So that's interesting because you don't see it as much in many cannabis flowers. However, it is definitely used throughout food industry as a flavoring agent. It has a very calming, relaxing effect to it. And so it's used industrially. However, it has that added benefit of it being calming. So when we start to talking about calming effects and stimulating effects, it's important to note also when we've discussed how the terpenes engage the brain through olfaction. The activity of stimulating a neurotransmitter, it really depends on the molecule that you're receiving or inhaling or ingesting. And so some molecules will help the body have a stimulating response. And so you get things like energy or memory enhanced or focus as kind of added benefits. Some of those terpenes can engage the brain and the central nervous system and have an opposite, more sedating or calming effect. So those effects that we attribute to many different types of plants, specifically cannabis, where we've been locked into indica sativa, we're all finding that naming is losing its validity, because we're finding that the terpenes are really what's having the actual action on the central nervous system creating those benefits. So depending on the terpene, it can encourage a stimulating reaction, or it can encourage a sedative or calming reaction. And so as we think about the most common and most found, geraniol, it has in general a more calming, relaxing effect on the body. So why all of the terpene talk? Why are we here? It really is to consider using cannabis more holistically. As we have seen in the industry, in many industries, there's been this kind of age-old naming system, indica versus sativa. I know some people get really kind of riled up about that, not trying to start any fights, but the indica versus sativa, we are quickly finding is really no longer applicable to our plants. The good thing is, it is a language that is recognizable. It is a good entry conversation for people and patients to discuss what the benefits are and how they have consumed in the past. So someone will say, yeah, I would take indica to go to sleep, or I would have some sativa to help me during the day. We get it. We understand where that is coming from. But now the goal is to consider, how do we push this conversation along further? I have had Gary Payton strain flower in California, and it was very much an energy producing strain. You can now find Gary Payton in the market that is more calming, high myrcene, linalool, more relaxing. We all know the story of Blue Dream. Blue Dream in Colorado versus Oregon versus Michigan versus Illinois will all have different profiles. So now we have to think about what's more universally discussed. How do we really dive into the benefits of these plants? And that's where the terpene profile is. If I am taking a moment and I'm reading through lab results, I'm reading the description, and I'm finding the top 3 to 4 dominant terpenes in a plant, that allows me to be able to hand select what works for me. The other thing to note is, how am I implementing this knowledge of terpenes in my daily life? How am I implementing it when I'm supporting patients? If you have a patient who has expressed their anxiety and are concerned about being paranoid with flower, you may want to steer away from things that can be focus producing. So maybe not a pinene, maybe not a limonene, maybe not a terpeneoline. But here's the thing about that. Everyone's different. We keep hearing that same story. We're all different. We all respond differently. So those flowers or those strains that historically would have been called sativa may also have corresponding terpenes to be associated with them that could also be stimulating. I would take a little bit of that time to research and find what works best for the patient. So if I'm really thinking about ways of how to help myself in medicating, I may consider, what can I take in the mornings versus the night? I cannot necessarily do a strain or flower with myrcene and linalool during the day, especially when I got work to do or meetings and I want to be functional. A lot of that also ties into tolerance. It can also tie into just your genetic makeup and just where you are in your level of medicating. So if I am someone who needs pain management, I may avoid a strain that has myrcene and linalool just because of their sedative action, and maybe focus on something with limonene. I would also consider, what am I having at night? Do I want more terpenoline? Do I want more limonene at night? Do I want more pinene at night? It really depends on the person. So there isn't really a right or a wrong way. It's really the consideration of what works for you. I can only speak from personal experience, and my personal experience tells me don't do anything that's stimulating during the day. I don't necessarily need that level of paranoia in my life, and so I'm not seeking that sensation or feeling, but I may be the person who can't necessarily take a very stimulating, very energy producing, a very focus inducing flower during the day if it's going to push me to anxiety or paranoia. If the mood is typically low and you're more depressed and you're having a lot of sedatives on a regular basis throughout the day, that is something that can induce a sensation of low motivation or lower mood if it's used constantly and chronically. So it's just also a way to consider, how do I change it up a bit? What do I think about? Yeah, I've been using this for a while, I've tried it. And then we're assuming that what was grown in spring of this year will be the same flower that's grown in fall of next year. There can be changes in the soil content, changes with the light, changes with the temperature that can vary those terpenes just slightly. We all want to have the best product and from the best grower, but there are changes that can occur in the terpene life cycle that can make it different from harvest to harvest. So a lot to consider. How do I work around that? I read. I find out what the strains are and what the terpene profiles that are associated with those strains, and then I try to choose my medicine based upon that. So terpenes are really introduced into our system as they work with other molecules. The entourage effect is something we've heard about, we've discussed. What that is the interaction of the cannabinoids and terpenes with the endocannabinoid system in the brain. And so that interaction of those wonderful molecules with our natural system is how we receive our medicine and healing from this plant. In considering the entourage effect, I do like to think about the cannabinoids, CBD, CBG, CBN, THC, THCV, the list goes on. But I also want to consider other plant molecules. Terpenes, obviously, we've discussed that in detail, but what about the antioxidants? What about the other components of the plant, the chlorophyll? There are many aspects of a plant that makes it a plant. I give this example very often, which is about garlic. The garlic, the Latin name is Allium sativum. And garlic was at one point broken down and studied for its key chemical called allicin, A-L-L-I-C-I-N. Allicin was found to be very heart protective, cardioprotective, also it thinned the blood. So this is like really good medicine to know this is a plant that's providing a wonderful amount of healing and medicine. Well, then companies started to make just the allicin. Instead of using the whole garlic bulb and crushing that and drying it and encapsulating it, it was then just sold as allicin at one point. And what was found is the effect of that medicine diminished significantly when it was just allicin, the extract, as opposed to allicin along with all of the hundreds of molecules found within the garlic plant. So what then needed to happen was allicin could be sold as long as it had the full garlic bulb crushed and dried and encapsulated, all mixed in order to get the maximum effect of that plant. We're in the same boat when it comes to cannabis. How do we consider all of the molecules, all of the components of the plant in order to really have a very therapeutic and medicinal value? So the additional cannabinoids that we are finding and rediscovering and their benefits have been really helpful in bringing together a more sound effect when it comes to the entourage effect. So those cannabinoids such as THC, which hopefully we've all heard of, CBD, CBN, CBG, have all been discovered to have their own independent therapeutic benefits. One thing I like to really think about is if I want to use cannabis holistically, and I want to make sure I have the terpenes present and I have the ability to source out flower or products that also have these additional cannabinoids, what's the best way or how do I use this more holistically? CBG, cannabigerol, which is one of the cannabinoids that's been found to have really good benefits on the metabolism, specifically in lowering blood sugar. So someone who may have been diagnosed with diabetes mellitus can have some really cool benefits in helping, maintaining, and regulating their blood sugar. But here's the thing. We have the CBG product, and it has THC, it's made from cannabis, it's extracted, and then I may put it into a gummy with sugar. Am I really using this holistically? No judgment, but it's just a consideration on how do I make the determination to find the best product. So maybe that CBG could be a tincture that does not have sugar added and the patient can get maximum benefit from a product such as that. It has been widely shown that we can have great success with neurological health when we're using additional cannabinoids. So THC in addition to CBD, as well as the THC acid known as THCA or CBD acid, CBDA. Those additional cannabinoids in one product can be neuroprotective. And what that means is if there is a condition of neurological imbalance, inflammation in the neurological system, in the brain function, having that addition of those acids as well as CBD can make for a really well-rounded healing product. When I think about neurological conditions, the list is long, so keep it short. I'm considering things like Alzheimer's, or Parkinson's that affects the nervous system, ADD, ADHD, those conditions where we've seen that there has been some deficit or decreased flow or change with the neurotransmitters in the brain. And as we go in to regulate that endocannabinoid system using phytocannabinoids, those are plant cannabinoids such as the THC, CBD, CBDA, THCA, that can bring about a level of regulation that offers a lot of long-term healing. So neuroprotection isn't just getting the benefit from this plant medicine and the cannabinoids now, it's the corrective action that can occur by implementing these and using them on a daily basis. Just as I mentioned how there can be some flower or strains of cannabis that can provide lots of energy, there are some that can provide very calming, sedative actions. Very important to consider if we're thinking about ADD, ADHD. You want to be able to have focus, pinene, limonene, mental focus, uplifting. But what happens if it's coupled with anxiety or an overactivity and you're needing a little bit of calm? So you may want to find a blend that will have linalool in addition to pinene, or myrcene in addition to its limonene. So you're wanting to play around with those different terpenes that are present. And to really add another healing therapeutic element, then you want the additional cannabinoid, CBD, to be present because it can create the balance. For many people, the THC with CBD can be a better option because the CBD can mitigate, it can reduce some of the negative effects that THC can present to many patients. So having CBD alongside the THC can really result in a more balanced experience. And again, that neuroprotection that CBD provides in the presence of THC is really significant. And also that neuroprotection that CBD provides when it's in the presence of THC is how we get to healing of the nervous system, neuroprotection, meaning helping the nerves, the nervous system, and encouraging their balance for the long run. This information I would like to take and be able to have a better product selection when it comes to how am I implementing cannabis as a therapy. How am I making the choice to find the best product, whether it's flower and choosing the terpene profiles, or if it's an edible product and wanting to see the combination of cannabinoids. And there are terpenes that are being added to edibles. So you can then find how to make your own product by finding those ingredients individually or selecting one that's going to be the best for you. I always thoroughly enjoy discussing cannabis for many reasons, because of its newness, the new industry, and how we're able to use it and find many new ways of product creation. I think it's just delightful to have this tool readily available, depending on your state, as an addition to your medicine chest. But the goal is to consider all plants. What other plants am I thinking about when I am using cannabis? Cannabis is a great option as a standalone, believe it or not, if you haven't already implemented it. But as I mentioned before, if I want a little added sedative action, I want to elongate the life of the flower, maybe I can blend in some lavender flower and consume that in my pre-roll. Or if you're really wanting to get to the heart of this insomnia, first, we got to think about our sleep ritual. That's a part of insomnia. What am I doing holistically to incorporate this plant medicine into my life? Sleeping, we all have our days and our nights that are better than others. But if it becomes a pattern where sleeping is a struggle and it's a challenge, and you have found the right strain, the right flower product, the right cannabis product for you, what else can be done to really heighten that sleep cycle? Am I getting rid of all electronics the hour before bed? Do I create a plan to help me sleep? Or can I have maybe chamomile tea? Chamomile is definitely a common herb that many of us have seen or heard. It's sold in most grocery stores. It is an option to help you calm the body and get into a relaxed state. Chamomile provides a sedative action. So do I get a little bit more of a synergy, a plant synergy, when I'm combining my cannabis tea with my THC tea? Or can I just consume, cannabis flower and find that the THC I may need less of? It's like I can play around with all the different plants, knowing that they have a synergy and they work well together. Chamomile also has many terpenes. It has bisabolol. Terpene we haven't discussed, but has been looked at for its wonderful anti-inflammatory effects, its immune effects, as well as its anti-cancer benefit. So now I'm thinking about my immune system. If I'm not sleeping because the immune system is wrecked, or I'm just struggling with immune issues, I'll have my strain of flower, but I may add in chamomile as an option. If I have found that cannabis has been the great solution to my anxiety, then I'm going to find the strains and continue to read the strain profile and make sure that those terpene profiles are consistent, because often that's what's providing that additional benefit of anxiolytic activity or anti-anxiety activity. So having your strain or your flower that creates a more anti-anxiety setting is remarkable. And for anyone who's had a concern or suffered with that, to find that medicine is key. Then I think let's add another layer to this, because anxiety can be a condition that comes on very frequently and it can linger. So you may have something that can calm you in the state of anxiety, but what about the long-term effects of anxiety? You want that neuroprotection. So when I say things like neuroprotection, you want the body to over time regulate and be supported so that anxiety doesn't necessarily affect you in those moments, but it becomes less of a daily occurrence. So when that happens, I think about the flower strains or the cannabis products that I can implement, but then I may also consider using lemon balm. And you'll see some products out on the market, they may add in lemon balm, usually pretty safe to take. But lemon balm is a really great source of caryophyllene. So when I'm thinking about why lemon balm could be an actual added benefit, it has a calming component to it. It also has that neuroprotection. And the caryophyllene terpene, as we've talked about, that engages that CB2 receptor, you're also getting that benefit of engaging the endocannabinoid system by using a non-cannabis plant in addition to your cannabis, and it can provide a longer level of healing, a longer interaction at the endocannabinoid system's regulation level, and it can help to prevent the reoccurrence of common regular anxiety. So it's just another way to consider, what else am I doing? So plant medicine is all encompassing. It's not just cannabis. Nothing obviously wrong with just cannabis, but it is the consideration of, what do I have at my fingertips, in my kitchen, in my cupboard? What things am I already using that can amplify the benefits of the cannabis that I am now introducing? So if you're really stoked about the holistic integration of cannabis in your life, take in your cannabis flowers, take in your cannabis products, and then just go visit your kitchen cupboard, your spice rack, and find other herbs, other spices that may have wonderful terpene profiles that you can blend, you can mix, you can add to the meal that you're infusing to really heighten the benefits of those terpenes. So just know, terpenes are all around us. They're in our cupboards, they're in our cabinets, they're in our spice racks. So please take the time, research, and find what else you can do to add in a healing benefit through the terpenes that you have at your fingertips.